Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. In last week's blog, I've talked about 5 confronting questions you have to ask yourself if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to talk to you about 5 reasons why you need to trust yourself when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Before I get into today's topic, I want to share a quote with you that I wrote on today's topic, and the quote says, "Trusting yourself and being successful is a direct result of taking action towards the things you want in life. No matter how challenging, confronting and heartbreaking the situation currently is, while your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, you must trust yourself and you must trust your gut feeling and intuition. Your gut and your intuition never lies. Even though society is trying to teach you to always listen to experts and teams of experts, you should not and never ignore tapping into your deepest source of wisdom, which is trusting yourself and trusting your gut feeling and your intuition. This level of knowledge is way more powerful than any expert knowledge can ever be. Rather than getting caught in or even intimidated by the perceived power and perceived authority of intensive care teams, you need to start looking inside of yourself and start trusting yourself instead. This is counterintuitive and not what society expects you to do. Don't do what 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care do, who end up with no peace of mind, no control, no power and no influence, and instead model what only a few select families of critically ill patients in intensive care achieve by being contrary, by trusting yourself so that you can get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. If you keep doing what you have always done, you will continue to get what you have always gotten. Since most people are run by their fears, instead of using their fears as motivators, they close themselves off from doing anything different and therefore never come close to reaching their full potential. Successful people realize when their approach is flawed or not working and simply seek to acquire new knowledge, techniques, skills and strategies from those who are already getting the results that they want. They apply what they learn and eventually get the same results. When you realize your efforts are not getting you what you really want, model what other successful people are doing that you are not, apply it and you'll get the same results. Don't try to reinvent the wheel when you are surrounded by a sea of other successful people you can model. So let's get into today's topic. If your loved one is critically ill in intensive care and is facing one of the following heartbreaking and challenging situations, where your loved one is very unstable and in a very critical condition, or is in a life-threatening situation, or is in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, including long-term ventilation, or your loved one may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury, or even worse, your loved one might be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order, or your loved one may be in a situation where the intensive care team suggests a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment as being quote unquote in the best interest of your critically ill loved one, or your loved one may even be approaching the end of life in intensive care. In those situations, you and your family don't tend to have a lot of time to come to grips with the situation that your critically ill loved one and your family are facing. The wheels that are in motion in the dynamic, volatile, political and scary environment that is intensive care are turning so fast that it's often hard to keep pace with the events and challenges that are taking place. Especially when expert teams are running the show it's easy to be intimidated by their perceived power and by their perceived authority. Especially since you and your family are so far outside of your comfort zone whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. And by now you have realized that you are facing one of the biggest challenges in your entire lifetime. You might have also realized by now that if you want to get what you want, and if you don't want to be like 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, who have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence, you need to do things very differently, very quickly. If you, your family, and your critically ill loved one don't want to be another statistic and number in the intensive care register. You basically need to do what the 99% of families in intensive care who have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence don't do. And you need to tap into one of your deepest and hidden wisdoms in order to make things happen for you and for your family. Intensive care teams are managing families in intensive care 24 hours a day, 365 days per year, and they know what to say, how to say it, and when to say it, so that they can get what they want. What intensive care teams want is often contrary to what you and your family want. What intensive care teams want is more often than not driven by what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care, and it's often driven by their hidden agenda. Therefore, as counterintuitive as it sounds, you need to very quickly move away from what the intensive care team, society, and the 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care do, which is to listen to the intensive care team and give in to their perceived power and their perceived authority. Instead, you need to very quickly starting to trust yourself and be in that tiny little 1% bracket of families of critically ill patients in intensive care who have peace of mind, control, power, and influence. Again, this is very counterintuitive, but it's one of your deepest wisdoms and sources of knowledge available to you at the drop of a hat. And you might say, Patrick, how do you know this to be true? How can you say that my gut feeling and my intuition is so powerful? Well, it's a great question to ask. And I can tell you that after more than 15 years intensive care nursing experience in 3 different countries, where I have also worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for more than 5 years, I have seen what many families of critically ill patients in intensive care who have peace of mind, have control, have power, and have influence do. That the 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care who don't have peace of mind, don't have control, don't have power, and don't have influence don't do. I have also done one-on-one consulting with numerous clients on Skype, over the phone, or via email. And they all do this because they know that my strategies work, and it brings them the results that they want and deserve. So therefore, without further ado, let's look at the 5 reasons why you need to trust yourself when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Number 1. When your loved one is critically ill in intensive care teams know how to play a high-stakes game that only they know how to win. The sooner you know and understand what you're up against, the sooner you will tap into one of your deepest sources of knowledge and wisdom, which is trusting yourself regardless of the odds you might be facing. The sooner you know and understand that the stakes are very, very high in intensive care, the sooner you can start doing something very, very differently, very quickly. Because otherwise you'll end up with no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence. Number 2. Especially when it comes to formal family meetings, the intensive care team has already scripted those meetings, and they know what to say, how to say it, and when to say it, so that they can get what they want. They are the master at playing with your emotions, and they'll wrap you around their little finger if you don't know what to do and if you don't trust yourself. Formal family meetings in intensive care are a prime example for how intensive care teams try to exert their perceived power and their perceived authority onto families of critically ill patients in intensive care. Most family meetings in intensive care are designed, structured, and mapped out in a way the intensive care team always gets what they want. Most families of critically ill patients in intensive care are totally unprepared when it comes to family meetings in intensive care. And that's why you not only need to start trusting yourself, you also need to have a strategy beyond trusting yourself, because otherwise the intensive care team will just walk all over you during a formal family meeting without you even realizing what's happening. Number 3. Decision making in intensive care goes way beyond your critically ill loved one's prognosis and diagnosis. And if you don't trust yourself, you and your critically ill loved one become wrapped up into politics, the fight for limited resources, or in the dynamics in intensive care. The fact of the matter is that after more than 15 years intensive care nursing in 3 different countries, and after I have spent more than 5 years managing intensive care units, I have seen it all. I have seen how highly political intensive care units are, and I have seen how intensive care teams can twist and turn your critically ill loved one's prognosis and diagnosis. And I have seen over and over again how intensive care teams rationalize care and treatment they are offering or not offering. More often than not, the positioning of your critically ill loved one's prognosis and diagnosis, and the offer of certain treatment options, is simply a result of what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. If you don't start trusting yourself, stand up for what you want, and if you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care, you'll become a casualty, and you'll be like 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care who have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence. Number 4. Especially when it comes to the most challenging of situations in intensive care, such as when your critically ill loved one in intensive care is very unstable and in a very critical condition, or they may be in a life-threatening situation, or your loved one may be in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, including long-term ventilation, or your loved one may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury. Your loved one may be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order. Or your loved one may be in a situation where the intensive care team suggests a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment as being, quote unquote, in the best interest of your critically ill loved one. Or your loved one may be approaching the end of life in intensive care. In those situations, you can't be sitting on the sidelines and watch this once-in-a-lifetime situation go by as a passive bystander. You need to very quickly start trusting yourself. You need to stand up to the intensive care team, demand the best, and demand what you want. Number 5. Start trusting yourself. Start to proactively manage the intensive care team and seek advice from somebody who can give you an unbiased view of intensive care. Nobody will ever tell you that trusting yourself is what you need to do when you have a loved one critically ill in intensive care. The fact of the matter is that if you don't trust yourself, you'll be at the mercy of the intensive care team. As a rule of thumb, you don't want to be at the mercy of other people, let alone be at the mercy of the intensive care team. It's much smarter to proactively start managing the intensive care team. This takes guts, and it's certainly not the approach the 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care take, but it's exactly what you need to do in order to quickly get peace of mind, control, power, and influence. How do you do that? And how can you get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power, real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care, and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insights so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our Your Questions Answered section where I answer your questions, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call us. Find our international phone numbers on our contacts tab. You should also check out our product section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting with me via Skype, via the phone or via email by clicking on the products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.